Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to give my review of WCW's Great American Bash 1995. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Alex Wright versus Brian Pillman. I thought this was a good match to start Great American Bash 95. Back and forth matchup between Alex Wright and Pillman. Pillman then hits a head scissors on Alex Wright. Wright then was keeping the pace of the match though. Pillman lands a chop on Wright. Wright and Pillman both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Pillman goes for a head scissors on Alex Wright, but Alex Wright ultimately counters it with a roll-up on Pillman, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Alex Wright. Hats off to Alex Wright for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a arm wrestling matchup. It is Diamond Dallas Page versus Dave Sullivan. I thought this was an awful match. Back and forth between Diamond Dallas Page and Dave Sullivan, with Sullivan ultimately getting the win in the arm wrestling match. Hats off to Dave Sullivan for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Sergeant Craig Pittman. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Jim Duggan and Pittman, with Duggan keeping the pace of the match. But Duggan ultimately wins his match due to disqualification. Hats off to Jim Duggan for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a tag team matchup. It is Harlem Heat versus Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Harlem Heat keeping the pace of the match. Booker T ultimately hits a roll-up, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Harlem Heat. Hats off to Harlem Heat for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Renegade versus Arn Anderson. I thought this was an okay matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Renegade and Anderson, with Renegade keeping the pace of the match. Arn Anderson ends up hitting an enziguri on Renegade that does absolutely nothing. Renegade ultimately hits a big splash off the top rope on Arn Anderson, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW Television Champion, is the Renegade. Hats off to the Renegade for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Tag Team Championships. It is the Nasty Boys versus Robert Eaton and Steven Regal. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Nasty Boys keeping the pace of the match. Harlem Heat make their way down to the ring. Booker T ends up getting involved in the match, with the referee being distracted. Booker T ends up hitting a Harlem Hangover on Brian Knobbs. Jerry Sags then hits a diving forearm on Robert Eaton, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Nasty Boys. Hats off to the Nasty Boys for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. It is Meng versus Sting. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Meng and Sting, with Meng keeping the pace of the match. Meng ends up unloading devastating strikes on Sting in the ring, but Sting ultimately hits a devastating DDT on Meng, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW United States Heavyweight Champion, is Sting. Hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of the Great American Bash 1995. It is Ric Flair versus Randy Savage. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Savage, with Savage keeping the pace of the match. Flair hits a knee drop on Savage in the middle of the ring. Flair then applies his signature figure 4 leg lock on Savage, but Savage breaks the hold. Flair then hits Randy with a cane. Referee doesn't see it. Pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Hats off to Ric Flair for getting the win in that matchup. Couple of things I'm going to say about the Great American Bash 1995 before I get out of here. Number 1, it was a decent event. Number 2, with that being said, could the event been a hell of a lot better than what it was? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the matches on this card, man, was just brutal. Prime example, DDP versus Dave Sullivan. I think Diamond Dallas Page had a great in-ring career in WCW. Towards the later, the later years in WCW, towards like, 98, 99, so on and so forth, he had a great run at WCW. This match between him and Dave Sullivan was trash. I thought it was absolutely trash. And like I stated a while back ago, I am not a fan of the gimmick matches that just don't make sense. I mean, an arm wrestling match, and, it was all, the winner of the match would have, if Dave Sullivan, well, since he did win, he would get like a date with the Diamond Doll, Kimberly Page, Diamond Dallas Page's wife at the time, would get a date, if you will, with the Diamond Doll. To be honest with you, man, I just thought it was a lackadaisical booking match, to be honest with you. And to be honest with you, I don't know really what the hell they were doing with Dave Sullivan anyway. For some reason, a lot of people wanted to see Dave Sullivan wrestle back in 1995, but I don't understand why. Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus Sergeant Craig Pittman. I thought the match was awful, man. I really did. I feel like what they did was, and again, every pay-per-view has a mid-card match. I get that. I completely understand that. But at the same time, I felt like they just took this random guy from, I guess it was the WCW Power Plan at the time, brought him in as an extra in a match against Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and I guess they wanted him to, get over on Jim Duggan and get the win. But it just, I felt like the character was a forced narrative character, in my honest opinion. I feel like the guy really wasn't selling the character that much, number one. Number two, Jim Duggan at the time, I mean, this was like almost towards the end of his in-ring career, if I'm not mistaken. So it wasn't like you were getting the same old Hacksaw Jim Duggan from way back in the day before 1995. So, again, I don't really know why they were even pushing Hacksaw Jim Duggan at the time. I felt like they were only pushing him as far as a mid-card status wrestler at the time because of the name of Hacksaw Jim Duggan. It wasn't like Jim Duggan was really in the main event scene for WCW even when he came over. So, again, I get it. There's mid-card matches, but those matches I could have done without. And the reason why I understand there's mid-card matches, I mean, if you look later on in the years of WCW, a lot of the pay-per-view cards they had, one of the first matches, if not the first match of every pay-per-view, was a cruiserweight matchup, whether it was for the cruiserweight championship or whatever. And those cruiserweight matches, to be honest with you, in my opinion, were sometimes almost better, if not better, than the main event of that pay-per-view that, in that year, on that card. So you can still be an opening matchup and put on like a 4 or 5 star match. You can have Rey Mysterio versus Dean Malenko, and it would be a 4 or 5 star match, easy. So that's my only thing about that. The other thing, too, was Renegade versus Arn Anderson. Renegade, I don't know if there's a lot of Renegade fans out there as far as, being a fan. But I will say this, man. Renegade was a knockoff to the Ultimate Warrior. 100%. I mean, everything that the guy did, the moveset, the way he acted, the way he ran in the ring, the way the pyro went off, it was exactly like the Ultimate Warrior. Now, credit, the Ultimate Warrior did make his debut for WCW a couple years, after 95. But Renegade was a complete 100% knockoff to the Ultimate Warrior. 100%. And to be honest with you, did I want him to win this match against Arn Anderson? Absolutely not, because Arn Anderson is a legit wrestler. I think he did great things for that television championship, where Renegade, really didn't do a damn thing for WCW, man. I mean, does anybody who remembers WCW really, the first 5 names that pop in your head, is one of those names going to be, oh man, I remember Renegade? No. At least not for me. I mean, Renegade was just trash. The gimmick was trash, and like I said, it was just a knockoff to the Ultimate Warrior. In the main event, Ric Flair versus Randy Savage. It was a great main event, and I've stated this multiple times in the past as well. During the years of like 93, 94, 95, I would say 94, 95, easily those 2 years in WCW, a lot of the main events were, kind of surrounded by the names of Hulk Hogan, Vader, Ric Flair, and Randy Savage. Those were the 4 main guys: Hogan, Savage, Flair, and Vader. Those were the 4 guys that usually, during that, 94, 95 time period, one of those 4 guys was easily in the main event for any WCW pay-per-view at that time. Easily. I mean, even when Hogan went to, NWO, there was not a time where you didn't see Hogan in the main event picture, especially when he, joined the NWO. It was going to happen regardless. So a lot of these pay-per-views, back then had everything to do with those 4 guys, especially Hogan. Unfortunately for this one, we got Flair and Savage, which it was a good match. I mean, Flair and Savage, I wouldn't consider them great rivals. I wouldn't consider that. You know, Flair and Hogan, rivals. Savage and Hogan, rivals. I feel like Ric Flair and Randy Savage was more like a competition kind of thing, if anything else. There wasn't really, to me, any legit heat between Flair and Randy than it was, you know, Flair and Hogan and Randy Savage and vice versa. So it made for a great match. And in this match, you know, they were hyping up that it was Father's Day weekend, or Father's Day, that actual day in 1995 at the Great American Bash. And you had Angelo Poffo, you know, Randy Savage's father, ringside during this match. So it was kind of cool, you know, cool to see that and see him kind of get involved in the match as well, and him trying to help out, you know, Randy Savage. So it was great to see that. But the Great American Bash, man, 1995, it was all about the main event. 100% about the main event. Ric Flair versus Macho Man Randy Savage. And it was a decent card at best, man. If I had to give WCW's Great American Bash 1995 a solid rating from 1 out of 10, I probably had to give Great American Bash 95 a solid rating of a 3.5 at best. And that's just being generous based upon the main event, man, to be honest with you. So, like I said, I'm going to have to give WCW's Great American Bash 1995 a solid rating of a 3.5 at best. But this is my review of the Great American Bash 1995. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.